It was 11:45 at night when my phone lit up on the nightstand. A single notification from my mother, Minnie. I swiped it open, expecting an emergency. Instead, I saw a photo. It was my childhood bedroom, but it looked like a crime scene. My books, my awards, my clothes, everything was shoved into black garbage bags. Underneath, a caption read, "We need this room for Eula's new walk-in closet. Come get your junk by morning or it goes to Goodwill." 3 seconds later, a second notification popped up. My sister Eula had hearted the message. My reaction was in tears. It was a complete freezing system halt. I just stared at the screen until it went black. For 29 years, I had been the invisible architecture of this family. My parents, Virgil and Minnie, lived in a world where appearances were the only currency that mattered. To the neighbors in our Cleveland suburb, they were old Money Country Club members with a Mercedes in the driveway and a daughter, Eula, who was a rising star in public relations. To me, they were a financial sinkhole. They didn't know that I knew about the foreclosure notices 5 years ago. They didn't know that I was the one who logged into my father's bank account every month to pay off the $15,000 in credit card debt he racked up trying to look wealthy. I was a logistics manager. My entire career was built on moving assets efficiently, spotting bottlenecks, and preventing collapse. And for a decade, my family was the biggest bottleneck I had to manage. I remember the first time I paid a bill for them. I was 22, fresh out of college with a degree I paid for myself. My mother called me weeping about a declined card at the grocery store. It wasn't groceries she was buying. It was champagne for Eula's graduation party. I paid it. I told myself it was a one-time thing. But then it became the electric bill, then the car lease, then Eula's rent in the city because she couldn't focus on her career if she was stressed about money. Why did I do it? Why did I pour nearly half my salary into a black hole while I drove a 10-year-old sedan and shopped at discount stores? For a long time, I told myself it was duty. But tonight, staring at the image of my life packed into trash bags to make room for my sister's shoes, I finally admitted the truth. It wasn't duty. It was rent. When you grow up as the spare part in a machine built to worship someone else, you start to believe that your existence is a debt. You believe that you take up space you haven't earned. So you pay in silence, you pay in cash, and you pay in dignity, hoping that if the check is big enough, they might finally let you sit at the table. I had normalized their cruelty so thoroughly that I thought it was just the cost of doing business. I thought if I kept the lights on, they wouldn't notice I was standing in the dark. But the rent had just gone up. They didn't just want my money anymore. They wanted my eraser. They wanted to replace the physical evidence of my childhood with a closet for the golden child. It was a clear message. We don't need you. We just need what you provide. I stood up and walked to my desk. I didn't drive to their house to beg for my things. I didn't call to scream. I sat down at my computer and opened a spreadsheet I hadn't looked at in years. It was titled Family Support. I had tracked every cent, every bailout, every transfer. I scrolled to the bottom. The number staring back at me wasn't just a figure. It was a testament to my own stupidity. $250,000. That was the price of my admission to a family that just revoked my membership. I closed the laptop. The sadness I expected didn't come. Instead, a cold, hard clarity settled over me. They wanted me gone. Fine. But they had forgotten one crucial rule of logistics. If you remove the load-bearing wall, the roof comes down. A week went by without a word about my belongings. I assumed they were sitting in a donation bin somewhere, or maybe rotting in a landfill. I didn't ask. I didn't go back to check. I just went to work, managed my supply chains, and waited. I knew the silence wouldn't last because silence doesn't pay the bills. On Tuesday, the summons arrived. It wasn't a request. It was a calendar invite sent by my mother. Eula's vice president celebration, 6 p.m. the Onyx Room. No note, no hope you can make it. Just a demand for my presence as a prop in their family tableau. I showed up because I needed to see it. I needed to see the machine operating one last time before I dismantled it. The venue was exactly their style. Too much marble, too many chandeliers, and food that looked expensive but tasted like nothing. Eula was holding court in the center of the room, wearing a silk dress that probably cost more than my first car. She was beaming, telling everyone how she had manifested this vice president role at a top public relations firm. I stood by the bar sipping club soda, watching her take credit for my work. They didn't know that 3 months ago I was the one who rewrote her resume. I was the one who built her portfolio website from scratch because she didn't know how to register a domain name. I coached her through the interview questions, feeding her lines about crisis management and brand synergy while she painted her nails. But tonight, she was the genius, and I was just the background noise. My father, Virgil, tapped a spoon against a champagne glass. The room hushed. He looked the part of the proud patriarch, tan and smiling, wearing a suit I had paid for 2 years ago. "To my daughter Eula," he boomed, his voice thick with unearned pride. "She is the fire of this family, the vision, the one who proves that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree." The room applauded. Then his eyes slid over to me, and his smile didn't waver, but his eyes went cold. "And to Cora, our steady rock, always there, always consistent. While Eula reaches for the stars, Cora keeps our feet on the ground. We need people like that, don't we?" A ripple of polite laughter moved through the room. It was a master class in dismissal. He hadn't just insulted me. He had publicly defined my value as subservient to hers. I was the dirt. She was the star. I set my glass down. I was about to walk out when my father cornered me near the kitchen service entrance. The smile was gone now. He looked sweaty, frantic. "There's a problem with the card," he whispered, leaning in close so the guests wouldn't see. "The catering manager is being difficult. They need the final payment now or they're going to stop the open bar." "So pay them," I said, my voice flat. "I can't right now. There's a hold on my account, a bank error." He waved his hand dismissively, the universal gesture of a liar. "And Eula's card is maxed out from the dress. Just handle it, Cora. I'll wire you the money on Monday." Handle it. That was my entire life in 2 words. Handle the mortgage, handle the credit card debt, handle the fact that we are frauds living a champagne life on a beer budget. "How much is it?" I asked. $4,500. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had thrown my childhood memories into trash bags 7 days ago to make room for shoes. He didn't look ashamed. He looked entitled. He expected this. In his mind, this was the natural order of things. I pay, they shine. "Okay," I said. I didn't argue. I didn't ask for a promise of repayment. I walked to the manager station, pulled out my debit card, and paid the bill. When the receipt printed, I didn't crumple it up. I laid it flat on the counter. I took my phone out and took a high-resolution photo of it. Then I emailed it to myself. "Everything all right, miss?" the manager asked. "Perfect," I said. "Just keeping records." I walked back out to the party. My father gave me a nod, not a thank you, just a confirmation that the appliance was working correctly. I looked at Eula, laughing with her friends, completely unaware that her big night was being subsidized by the sister she had erased. I didn't say goodbye. I walked out the side door into the cool night air. That $4,500 wasn't a gift. It was the final purchase price of my freedom. They thought I was the rock that kept them grounded. They were about to find out what happens when the rock starts rolling downhill. That night, I didn't go to sleep. I went to war. But my battlefield wasn't a shouting match in the living room. It was a spreadsheet on my dual monitor setup at home. I brewed a pot of black coffee, cracked my knuckles, and stopped being Cora, the doormat daughter. I became Cora, the forensic auditor. I pulled bank statements going back 10 years. I accessed the shared cloud drive my father had carelessly given me the password to years ago so I could fix the printer. He never changed it. I downloaded everything. Tax returns, credit card statements, mortgage documents. I laid it all out, transaction by transaction, dissecting the anatomy of their financial abuse. It was nauseatingly fascinating. I saw the $20,000 business loan I gave them 4 years ago, listed in their personal notes as Cora's contribution. I tracked where it went. It didn't go to Dad's consulting firm. It went to a luxury cruise through the Mediterranean, a trip they told me they had won in a raffle. I saw the tuition payments for Eula. I saw the lease payments for a Range Rover I wasn't allowed to drive. I saw the $500 dinners on nights when I was eating expired yogurt to save money for new tires. They had been bleeding me dry not to survive, but to perform. They were burning my future to keep their vanity warm. The final total sat at the bottom of the screen glowing in red, $263,000. That was the cost of their love. That was the price tag on my invisibility. But I wasn't done. I dug deeper into public records. I needed to know the asset situation. I pulled the title on the house, the 4-bedroom colonial in the nice part of town that I had been kicked out of. And that's when I found the bomb. There was a lien, a second mortgage taken out 3 years ago. High interest, predatory terms. Where did that money go? I cross-referenced the dates with their social media. There it was. A vacation cabin in Deep Creek Lake they claimed belonged to a friend. It didn't. They bought it. They leveraged the family home to buy a weekend getaway for Eula and her friends, and they hadn't made a payment on the primary mortgage in 4 months. I stared at the document. Notice of default. They were 30 days away from foreclosure. They were living on a precipice, partying on the edge of a cliff and demanding I pay the catering bill while the ground crumbled beneath them. They weren't just mean, they were insolvent. I leaned back in my chair. The old Cora would have panicked. She would have cashed out her 401k, begged for a loan, and rushed in to save them. But the old Cora was gone. The woman sitting in this chair had just sold her logistics software company for $90 million 6 months ago, a fact they didn't know because they never asked about my little computer job. I picked up my phone and dialed my lawyer, Jasper. It was 3 in the morning, but he answered on the second ring. "Cora, is everything okay?" "I need to make an acquisition," I said, my voice steady. "Now. First thing in the morning, I want to buy a distressed debt portfolio, specifically a single residential mortgage note held by First National Bank." I gave him the address. Isn't that your parents' house?" Jasper asked, hesitation creeping into his voice. "It is. They're in default. The bank is about to auction it. I want to buy the note before it hits the open market. Cora, if you do this, you become the lender. You hold the lien. You effectively own the debt. I know you want to bail them out." "No," I said, looking at the photo of my trash-bagged room still open on my phone. "I want to set up a shell company. Call it Phoenix Holdings. Keep my name off everything. Purchase the debt. Full cash offer. I want the deed in my hand by Friday. And then..." "And then?" "And then," I said, closing the spreadsheet, "we proceed with collections." I hung up. I didn't feel guilty. I felt efficient. They had spent a decade treating me like a transaction. Now I was just closing the deal. I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was their creditor, and payment was due. By Friday, the paperwork was signed. Phoenix Holdings was officially the holder of the mortgage note for 124 Hawthorne Lane. I held the power to foreclose, to evict, to demand payment in full. But my parents didn't know that yet. To them, the silence from the bank was just another stroke of luck they felt entitled to. On Saturday morning, my phone rang. It was Virgil. I let it ring twice before answering, putting it on speaker so I could continue packing the few boxes I had retrieved from storage, the things they hadn't managed to throw away yet. "Cora, we have a situation," he said. No hello, no apology for the party, just the tone of a CEO summoning a subordinate. "We need to have a family meeting, immediately." "I'm busy," I said, folding a sweater. "This isn't optional. It's an emergency. There's been a clerical error with the bank. They're threatening the house. A clerical error. That's what he called 4 months of missed payments and a secret second mortgage. I can't help you with bank errors, Dad. Don't be difficult, just come over. We need to strategize." Strategize meant find a way for Cora to pay for it. I almost said no. I almost told him right then. But I realized that for the foreclosure to feel real to them, they needed to believe they had one last chance to manipulate me and watch it fail. I drove over an hour later. The house looked exactly the same. The manicured lawn, the Mercedes in the driveway, the facade of perfect suburban success. Inside, the tension was thick enough to choke on. My mother was pacing the living room, wringing her hands. Eula was sitting on the sofa, scrolling on her phone, looking bored but annoyed that her weekend was being interrupted by money stuff. Virgil sat at the head of the dining table, surrounded by papers. He looked up when I walked in, his face a mask of serious concern. "Sit down, Cora," he commanded. I remained standing. "What's going on?" "The bank is being unreasonable," he started, launching into a rehearsed speech. "They're claiming we're behind on the mortgage. It's obviously a mistake. Some glitch in their system from when we refinanced for the renovations." Renovations? He meant the Deep Creek Lake cabin. "They're threatening foreclosure proceedings if we don't bring the account current by Monday," he continued. "It's a misunderstanding, but we need liquidity to hold them off until our lawyers can fix it." "How much liquidity?" I asked. $50,000. I didn't blink. $50,000? "It's just a bridge loan, Cora," my mother interjected, her voice trembling. "Just until everything gets sorted out. We know you have savings. You've always been so good with money. And think about the family image," Eula added, not looking up from her screen. "If people find out Dad is having money trouble, it could ruin my reputation at the firm. I can't have that kind of scandal attached to my name right now." "Your reputation," I repeated. "That's the priority here." "Of course it is," Virgil snapped. "We all have reputations to uphold. Now, how quickly can you transfer the funds? I assume your 401k has enough equity to borrow against if your liquid cash is tied up." He'd already calculated how I would pay. He had spent my retirement in his head before I even walked through the door. "I'm not liquidating my 401k, I said. "Then take out a personal loan," he demanded, his patience snapping. "You have perfect credit. We helped you build that credit. Use it." "No." The word hung in the air, heavy and absolute. "Excuse me?" Virgil stood up, his face reddening. "You ungrateful little... We raised you in this house. We gave you everything. And now, when we face a tiny hiccup, you're going to turn your back on us? You're going to let us lose our home because you want to hoard your little manager's salary? You're selfish, Cora," Eula spat out. "You've always been selfish, sitting on your money while Mom is crying. Do you even care about this family? If you don't do this," my mother said, her voice turning icy, "don't bother coming back. We don't need a daughter who enjoys watching her parents suffer. You're either with us or you're cut off completely." They were threatening me with the very thing I wanted. They were trying to leverage a relationship that was already dead. "Is that your final offer?" I asked. "Pay up or get out?" "Yes," Virgil hissed. $50,000 by Monday or you're dead to us." I looked at them. Really looked at them. The entitlement, the cruelty, the absolute blindness to their own reality. "Okay," I said. "I'll see you on Monday." I turned and walked out. They shouted after me, calling me names, listing my failures, screaming that I would regret this. But I didn't regret it. I smiled all the way to the car because they didn't know that on Monday I wasn't coming back as their daughter with a check. I was coming back as the owner with the keys. On Monday morning, I didn't go to work. I put on my best suit, a tailored charcoal blazer that cost more than my parents' monthly mortgage payment, and drove to 124 Hawthorne Lane. I parked my car, not in the driveway, but on the street, leaving space for the moving trucks that would be arriving in 30 days. I walked up the path I had shoveled every winter for 18 years. I unlocked the door with the key I wasn't supposed to have anymore. Inside, they were waiting. My mother was pacing again. Eula was inspecting her nails. Virgil sat at the head of the dining table, looking like a king waiting for his tribute. When I walked in, relief washed over his face, quickly replaced by smug satisfaction. "You're late," he said, checking his watch. "I assume you have the check." I didn't answer. I walked past my mother, past Eula, and stood at the opposite end of the table. I placed a thick leather portfolio on the polished wood. "Sit down," Virgil commanded. "Let's get this over with so I can call the bank." "I prefer to stand," I said. "And you're not calling the bank, Virgil. The bank doesn't own this house anymore." He froze. "What are you talking about? Did they sell the note?" "They did." "To who?" Panic edged into his voice. "Who holds the lien?" "Phoenix Holdings." "Who the hell is Phoenix Holdings?" Eula asked, looking up from her phone. "Is that some vulture fund? Are they going to evict us?" "Phoenix Holdings," I said, opening the portfolio, "is a private asset management firm specializing in distressed debt acquisition." I pulled out a single document, the deed to the property, stamped and notarized. I slid it across the table. It stopped right in front of my father. "And I am the sole proprietor of Phoenix Holdings." The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was a vacuum. It sucked the air out of the room. My mother stopped pacing. Eula's phone clattered to the floor. Virgil stared at the document, his face draining of color until he looked like a ghost. "You," he whispered, "you bought the mortgage." "I bought the debt," I corrected. "I bought the arrears, the second mortgage you took out for the cabin, and the primary note. I own it all, which means, legally speaking, I am your landlord." "How?" my mother gasped. "Where did you get that kind of money? You're a logistics manager." "I was a logistics manager," I said, my voice calm, factual, lethal. "I started a supply chain software company 6 years ago. I sold it last year to a global shipping conglomerate." I paused, letting the weight of the next sentence settle on them like a heavy blanket. "I accepted a buyout of $90 million. Virgil made a sound like he had been punched in the gut. He slumped back in his chair, his eyes wide, staring at me as if I were a stranger. And in a way, I was. The daughter he knew, the doormat, the ATM, the invisible girl, was gone. $90 million, Eula squeaked. "You have $90 million. "Yes, and you have 30 days. I pulled out the second document, the notice to vacate. "What?" Virgil sputtered, trying to regain some semblance of authority. "You can't do this. We're your family. This is our home." "This is my home," I said. "My name is on the deed. My money paid for the walls you're sitting between, and frankly, you're terrible tenants. You haven't paid rent in 4 months. You've neglected maintenance, and you've been hostile to the owner." "Cora, please," my mother pleaded, tears finally spilling over. "We have nowhere to go. You can't just kick us out on the street." "I'm not kicking you out on the street. I'm initiating foreclosure proceedings on a defaulted asset. It's just business, Mom. Isn't that what you always told me? It's just business." I looked at them. Really looked at them. They weren't powerful. They weren't the titans of industry or the socialites they pretended to be. They were just 3 people who had spent their lives buying things they couldn't afford to impress people. They didn't like using money they stole from their own daughter. "You have 30 days to vacate the premises," I said. "If you are not out by noon on the 30th, the sheriff will remove you. I suggest you start packing. You can use the boxes you packed my room with. I left them in the garage." I turned to leave. "Wait," Virgil shouted, standing up. "We can fix this. We can work something out. You're rich, Cora. You have $90 million. Why are you doing this over 50 grand? I stopped at the door and looked back. Because it was never about the money, Dad. It was about the fact that you were willing to evict me for a closet. You were willing to erase me. So now I'm returning the favor. I tossed my set of keys onto the entryway table. They landed with a heavy clatter. "I'll see you in court if necessary, but I wouldn't recommend it. My lawyers are much better than yours." I walked out the front door and down the path. I didn't look back at the house. I got into my car, started the engine, and drove away. Behind me, the house stood silent and imposing, a monument to their ego. But in the rearview mirror, it just looked small. 3 weeks later, the sun rose over the Gulf of Mexico, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet that I had only ever seen in paintings. I stood on the balcony of my new home in Sarasota, Florida, holding a mug of coffee that tasted like freedom. The air was warm, smelling of salt and jasmine, a stark contrast to the stifling, polished scent of my parents' house. I wasn't hiding anymore. I wasn't a secret millionaire living in a modest apartment to avoid attention. I had bought this house, a sprawling modern glass and steel structure overlooking the water, under my own name. No shell companies, no aliases, just Cora. My phone was on the table inside, turned off. I knew what was happening back in Cleveland. The movers had come yesterday. My parents were currently unpacking their reduced lives into a 2-bedroom condo on the outskirts of town. It was a nice condo. I knew because I owned that building too. I had allowed them to rent it at market rate, a final act of grace they probably interpreted as an insult. They were furious, humiliated, and for the first time in their lives, accountable. Moving here wasn't running away. It was an act of sovereignty. For years, I thought that staying and enduring their abuse was strength. I thought that if I paid enough, tolerated enough, and shrank myself enough, I could earn my place. But standing here, watching the waves crash against the shore, I realized the truth. You cannot earn love from people who are committed to misunderstanding you, and you cannot find peace in a war zone, no matter how much armor you wear. Moving wasn't a retreat. It was a relocation of assets. I was moving my most valuable resource, myself, to an environment where I could thrive. It was the ultimate logistical maneuver. I had cut the dead weight and optimized for happiness. I thought about Virgil and Minnie. They were probably telling their friends a story about how their ungrateful daughter stole their home. They were probably crafting a narrative where they were the victims. Let them. Their opinion of me was none of my business. They had chased status their entire lives, buying things they couldn't afford to impress people who didn't care. And in the end, it left them with nothing. They had spent decades building a facade, a hollow shell of wealth and perfection. I had spent that same time building something real, skills, resilience, a fortune. They had the appearance of power. I had the substance of it. And when the crash came, the facade shattered, but the substance held firm. It was the ultimate lesson in value versus cost. They knew the price of everything and the value of nothing. I finished my coffee and walked down the private stairs to the beach. The sand was cool under my feet. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with air that didn't feel heavy with expectation. I wasn't just retiring. I was starting over. I had already begun paperwork for a new foundation, the Invisible Fund. Its mission was simple: to provide financial literacy, legal aid, and emergency grants to family members who were being financially abused. I wanted to help other fixers find their exit strategy. I wanted to turn my pain into a ladder for someone else. I walked toward the water, the ocean stretching out before me, vast and open. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't check my phone. For the first time in 29 years, I wasn't waiting for a text, a demand, or a crisis. I was just here, present, whole. The invisible girl was gone. The woman walking on the beach was seen, powerful, and finally, undeniably free.